Very few men have been more universally derided than George Kliavkoff. It's understandable. On his watch, a century-old sporting institution burned to the ground while he seemingly sat and pointed fingers. But Kliavkoff was once the apple of an entire industry's eye, described in total sincerity as a rising star. He was a man of great accomplishment and innovation who took every inch life could possibly give him. So how did that all go up in smoke? How did a man run from what he knows and gamble away an impossibly unattainable legacy on an ill-advised childhood fantasy? The first domino in that story fell long before he was even born. In stark contrast to his peers, many Ivy Leaguers were born on third base. Kliavkoff's background is one defined by struggle. His father Philip, a Bulgarian, fought the Nazis on the Eastern Front, later fleeing west to escape the post-war Soviet puppet government. His mother Susan likewise fled the communist bloc, along with 200,000 others during the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, moving first to Louisville, then to New York, where the two met and started a family. First-hand witnesses to the American dream, the two Kliavkoff children were raised to be hard workers and lofty goal-setters, never daunted by even the longest odds. Owing in part to those virtues and in part to his mother's extollments on the importance of education, George earned a spot in Boston University's 1985 freshman class, where he, for the first time, could seriously explore what made him, him. During his first week on campus, Kliavkoff tried a little bit of everything. At the behest of several coaches who were impressed by his physical stature, he even decided to try out for the rowing team, despite never having been in a boat. Ultimately, he made the team, and though, by his own admission, he wasn't exactly a superstar, the experience, the day-to-day grind, working as a team, striving to achieve something greater, stuck with him forever. By the time graduation came in 1989, young George was headstrong, hungry for success, and driven by his passions. While preparing for law school, these passions led him to Seattle for the second edition of Ted Turner's Goodwill Games, a countercultural Olympics formed in response to Cold War-era boycotts. His first job in sports, Kliavkoff served as a PR coordinator, gaining direct practical knowledge on the minutiae of sports media, all while rubbing elbows with the world's best athletes and most powerful people. For Turner, the games were a disaster, losing TBS a reported $44 million. But Kliavkoff parlayed his time in the Pacific Northwest into yet more projects of passion. As a law student at UVA, with the game still fresh on his mind, Kliavkoff, along with roommate Bill Bailey, founded the Virginia Sports and Entertainment Society. Quickly, he grew the club from a couple members and a pipe dream to hundreds and influential guest speakers from all across the two industries. It was also in Charlottesville that he first tried his hand at sitting in the commissioner's chair, organizing a pre-digital fantasy baseball league in which he didn't even have a team. Described by Bailey, now a senior vice president at Disney, as relentlessly optimistic, Kliavkoff was steadfast in the pursuit of a life he desired. His thirst for success led him first to LA-based law firm Kinsella, Bosch, Fujikawa, & Tao, at the time preeminent specialists in high-profile litigation. Working with clients from Mike Tyson to Sean Connery, Kliavkoff got premium first-hand experience in sports and entertainment that would later be invaluable. Discord between the partners, eventually leading to an early-aughts dissolution, pushed Kliavkoff across town to Howarth & Smith, where he would build his stature to such a degree that Seattle's Perkins Coie, one of the largest law firms in the world, came calling. 1990 Seattle was like a playground for George. Starbucks was exploding, Boeing ruled the skies, and two of Perkins Coie's very own clients, Microsoft and Amazon, were reshaping our online future. Innovation abounded, and it wasn't long before Kliavkoff's ambition compelled him to chase his own piece of the digital gold rush. In March of 2000, only months before the apex of the dot-com boom, Kliavkoff left Perkins Coie, joining fledgling online streaming provider RealNetworks. RealNetworks, which had streamed the first live audio over the internet in 1995, was rapidly transforming the way people consumed content. Sworn by many in hindsight to have been Satan's bane on earth for its predictable buffering and quality issues, RealPlayer and Real Jukebox allowed users to peruse live shows, clips, music videos, albums, adult films, anything you can imagine, all from their own homes. By 2000, 85% of all content streamed on the internet went through RealNetworks, in spite of Microsoft and Apple's efforts to cut them down to size. CEO Rob Glazer, a Microsoft legend in his own right, saw the writing on the wall, though. While RealNetworks' primary revenue driver was renting server space, Microsoft and Apple were offering this for free. Buoyed by ever-growing computer sales revenue, the two giants had significantly more leeway to fight lengthy wars of attrition benefiting their native competitors. It was this problem that Kliavkoff was brought in to help solve. Much like in the modern digital media explosion, the company was faced with limited options. Making or selling content was never going to be their game. The costs of production would cripple them, and a wide array of one-time deals would only serve to stave off their impending death. Instead, it was decided that, if they were to have any chance, they would need to be more like America's traditional media delivery companies. Cable. Over 2 years of frantic work behind the scenes in Seattle culminated in a holiday 2001 delivery of the all-new Real One Player, a $20 platform combining their two previous offerings with a compatible web browser, and the Real One service, a tiered monthly subscription to both their premium video offerings and Real One Radio. Backed by powerful content partners including the NBA, ABC, CBS, and CNN, the Real One service, later known as SuperPass, racked up 1 million subscribers in the first 2 years. SuperPass became such a rousing success that Kliavkoff's services again became a hot commodity, prompting one of Real Media's biggest fish, Major League Baseball, to pry him away. Through their subsidiary MLB Advanced Media, or BAM, Major League Baseball had spent much of the early 2000s experimenting with their own media delivery platform. The project had started with modest goals, creating team websites and an online identity. But after a top-dollar consulting firm burned their seed money on an unusable product, BAM had to think more ambitiously to justify their continued operation. In 2001, they took their first big swing, spending millions to deliver Mariners radio broadcasts live on the internet in hopes of capturing the Japanese audience who were entranced by superstar Ichiro Suzuki's every move. Again, though, it was a colossal failure. By their CEO Robert Bowman's own admission, the project never even made it to 1,000 subscribers. By 2002, BAM was so strapped for cash that they practically extorted Ticketmaster for $10 million, threatening to revoke their MLB ticketing privileges if the company didn't sign on as an official partner. Down to their last strike, streaming video would make or break BAM. After positive experiments down the stretch in 2002, BAM readied an effort to provide a full season of streaming baseball. Though only able to offer out-of-market games, MLB TV was an instant hit. Its $80 2003 package accrued over 100,000 subscribers and had the potential to turn the tides of profitability permanently in BAM's favor. To ensure the product's long-term stability and their long-term viability, BAM needed to bring in digital media ringers capable of keeping the newfound Ferrari between the lines, and thus called upon George Kliavkoff. During Kliavkoff's tenure as EVP, BAM exploded. As MLB TV continued to gain steam naturally as technology improved, new strategic partnerships really elevated the company. ESPN signed on for $20 million a year to have access to online highlights and exclusive fantasy content, with Fox and others later following suit. They acquired Tickets.com to centralize control over primary ticket distribution. Most intriguingly, they began to commoditize their expertise, contracting to develop CBS's early March Madness streaming infrastructure. By 2006, BAM was finally returning profits to ownership, repaying the somewhat unfounded faith that was shown in them 6 years prior, and media giants were taking notice. Habitually successful, and now extremely visible, a long line of suitors formed for the 39-year-old Kliavkoff. After much discussion, he opted to join NBC Universal as their first-ever chief digital officer, enticed by the chance to shape one of the world's most significant legacy media companies in his own vision. His first task, the one CEO Jeff Zucker hired him to fulfill, was to again develop an in-house streaming service, a joint venture with News Corp thought to be television's answer to online video startup YouTube. By signing distribution agreements with AOL, MySpace, MSN, and Yahoo, Kliavkoff was able to get his project, now known as Hulu, onto the screens of 96% of American internet users. Supported by blue-chip advertising, Hulu's professionally produced content leveled all comers in revenue per viewer and per video. Within 4 months, it established itself in the top 10 of all video sites by viewership and was described as the one legitimate challenger to YouTube. This immediate success bought Kliavkoff enough credibility to further explore his own capability. The 2008 Olympics saw the rollout of NBCOlympics.com, an online hub for live streaming and highlights of the Beijing Games. Record-breaking performances from Michael Phelps and Usain Bolt in competition led to record-breaking performances online, smashing all previous NBC digital viewership and page traffic numbers. Outside of content, Kliavkoff was also pivotal in establishing the Peacock Equity Fund, a venture fund expressly for investing in tech companies whose products could further amplify the reach of NBC. By the time Kliavkoff left to explore other projects in 2008, NBC was generating $1 billion annually from its digital properties. Yet again, he had found himself wildly successful. Though post-recession, Kliavkoff had discovered entrepreneurship wasn't all it was made out to be, his bona fides did help him land an EVP job with Hearst Communications, whose subsidiaries like ESPN, A&E, and Popular Mechanics could greatly benefit from his digital experience. Serving as head of their investment arm, Hearst Ventures, and as deputy chief of Hearst Entertainment, he was tasked simply with fueling innovation through acquisition, much as he had with Peacock Ventures. Given that directive necessitated a certain amount of risk-taking, his tenure with Hearst is much harder to judge than his previous stops. The wins were huge. Strategic investments in BuzzFeed and Roku pushed them years ahead in advertising and streaming adoption. Further investment in Yoka, a Chinese fashion site, placed Hearst at the forefront of what we now call affiliate marketing, allowing their huge online readership to browse products directly through stories. By 2012, Hearst's digital earnings just about equaled their formidable print revenue, uniquely positioning the company to survive legacy media's digital crisis. In recognition of his division's advances, Kliavkoff was made co-president of Hearst Entertainment, one of the most prestigious job titles in all of media. It wasn't all roses, however. The losses were huge too. Manila, one of Hearst's most intensive investments, failed to scale and blew up in everyone's faces despite winning a trophy cabinet full of awards. ScoreBig.com, another substantial outlay, was sold off for parts after just 2 years in the face of an insurmountable liquidity crisis. LMK.com, among Kliavkoff's first projects, was so missable you'd be hard-pressed to find a single Google search result for it. Consider, then, that there seems to be a clear delineation between Kliavkoff's hits and his misses at Hearst. BuzzFeed, Roku, and Yoka all bore at least some resemblance to traditional media formats, but Manila, ScoreBig, and LMK were seismic shifts beyond anything he had ever before attempted. When Kliavkoff was willing to keep his head down and operate within himself, he was one of the absolute best in the business, well respected by his peers and on top of the world. But on the occasion he haphazardly swung for the fences, serious questions of judgment arose. Perhaps in acknowledgement of this fact, in 2016, Kliavkoff gave up the cushy corner office, hoping instead for a more involved role in Silicon Valley, intent on getting back to his roots. VR firm Jaunt, searching for a CEO to lead them through a transition from manufacturer to video platform, were quick to call. Backed by a deeper VC war chest than competitor Oculus, who had recently been acquired by Facebook for $2 billion, Jaunt was as well positioned as any to ride the VR wave. It was almost as if it was meant to be. Kliavkoff received a budget in line with what he had become accustomed to since leaving Real, and got to work on a video delivery platform, where he originally made his name. Shortly after joining the company, Kliavkoff proudly declared to Variety magazine that virtual reality was set to be the next big thing in video, and his early work showed genuine confidence in that position. While continuing to provide recording equipment to their content partners, most notably Disney, Jaunt rapidly expanded their own content creation capability. Bringing the entire production process from start to finish in-house, Jaunt became the go-to company for anyone hesitant or unable to outlay the capital required for VR video. Indie filmmakers and advertisers alike turned to Jaunt for their first forays into virtual reality. In a March 2017 interview with SV Startups just 6 months after he took the job, Kliavkoff claimed that in-house content creation and media hosting already made up half of the business's revenue. Quickly, though, he ran into many of the same problems that plagued him at Hearst. Despite being a tremendously gifted builder and a strong media mind, nobody would ever mistake Kliavkoff for an oracle. As he, the company, and their partners would come to learn, no matter how good of a platform you build, how solid the bones are, reality is not Field of Dreams. The explosion in appetite for VR simply wasn't coming. Headsets were expensive and clunky. VR content was scarce and mostly short form. The bandwidth demands for full 3D were immense. By 2018, a crisis of purpose formed within Jaunt's staff. Some desired to stay the course in VR content, while others sought to go all in on a business-to-business augmented reality software platform they had been developing. Ultimately, AR won the war over VR, with Jaunt pivoting from being the Netflix of virtual reality to selling business solutions, and Kliavkoff's tolerance for riding the winds of change came to an end. He was, after all, a media and entertainment executive, not a researcher or some crazy tech mogul. All of his career had been focused on delivering an engaging experience to an audience. A month later, a nationally newsworthy chunk of the company was laid off or sold off, but Kliavkoff made out like a bandit. Mere days before the evisceration of Jaunt's VR division, he joined MGM Resorts as president of sports and entertainment, giving him total control over the entertainment capital of the world's biggest entertainer. From UFC to Elton John, Kliavkoff got to get down and dirty with talent and sponsors in a way that truly he hadn't since his time at BAM. The might of MGM was incomparable, especially in the wake of sports betting legalization, and with it, anything he wanted was at his beck and call. Until the world fell apart. In 2020, COVID wreaked havoc on the Las Vegas tourism industry. Forget cancellations or empty hotels and casinos. The most grim displays of its health were longtime Vegas staples like Blue Man Group and Cirque du Soleil entering bankruptcy. Without its gimmicks and characters, after all, what even is Las Vegas? Unbelievably, Kliavkoff was again up the creek without a paddle, but at least this time it was through no fault of his own. Well, not yet anyway. See, on top of overseeing all of MGM's venues and performers, Kliavkoff's duties also included representing the company as acting governor of their WNBA team, the Las Vegas Aces. To this point, he'd actually done a thoroughly impressive job for a first-time sports executive. Prior to Kliavkoff's tenure, the Aces and their pre-Vegas predecessors were truly the league's most embarrassingly poor franchise. In the 3 years preceding his takeover, the team accrued 3 straight number 1 draft picks, a feat never before and never since duplicated. With nowhere to go but up, he installed general manager Dan Padover, one of the league's fastest risers, and the team's outlook changed overnight. Padover, unlike his predecessors, was willing to lay it all on the line, sending out years' worth of high-value assets to bring in mercurial superstar Liz Cambage. The results were there from the off. The league's record single-game scorer and reigning MVP runner-up, Cambage was the perfect foil to rising forward Aja Wilson and their stable of homegrown contributors. The new Aces stormed the league, going from number 1 pick to the Western Conference Finals in year 1, then all the way to the WNBA Finals in the bubble in year 2. But, gripped by tighter financial constraints, MGM's senior executives decided that with the steep rise to contention and 2 bona fide superstars, it was the perfect time to sell the Aces as they pursued their asset-light vision for the future of the company. Though the buyer, Aces season ticket holder and Las Vegas Raiders owner Mark Davis, had been preordained by CEO Bill Hornbuckle, Kliavkoff, as governor of the Aces, was still to oversee the sale. Davis did the normal due diligence, touring facilities, speaking to players, lobbying local governments, and in January of 2021, the 2 sides emerged with an agreement. Announced on January 14th and ratified on February 12th, MGM Resorts sold its entire stake in the WNBA runners-up for a reported $2 million. $2 million. No percentage retained, an entire professional sports franchise sold for less than a quarter of what its CEO paid for his house a year later. Insider reporting on the sale value of WNBA teams is scant, but, just for comparison's sake, the Liberty sold for $10 to $14 million 2 years prior. In fact, from what's been reported, it could be the lowest sale price for a WNBA team in the 21st century. Now, 3 years on, Golden State and Toronto are paying $50 million expansion fees, and Sportico values the Aces at $150 million. It was one of the worst deals in the history of not just women's basketball, but all of sports, and the signs were there. So what happened to Kliavkoff? Surely his short-sightedness made him to some degree a pariah. Surely such an underwhelming fee, especially considering the investment that MGM made to lure the team to Vegas in the first place, weighed heavily on his reputation. But it didn't. Unbelievably, he advanced his career off the back of his time at MGM. Just 2 months after the sale was finalized, the Pac-12 reached out to gauge Kliavkoff's interest as part of their search for a new commissioner. Reporting at the time suggested that the conference coveted an executive with a background in sports media to help negotiate their new TV deal. It was an understandable position to take. Outgoing Commissioner Champagne Larry Scott had sunk the conference into dangerous financial territory over his 12 years with the league. Big bets on the future of the Pac-12 network and a $90 million state-of-the-art league office had come up empty and eroded their safety net. They desperately needed a strong TV deal to maintain Power 5 relevance. But many thought they were putting the cart before the horse, that the Pac-12 should bring in a football ringer instead of a TV exec to repair the ecosystem of their biggest revenue driver. After all, how much extra money could connections and career experience bring to the table over a more watchable and successful product? In the eyes of the Pac-12 Executive Committee, a lot. After being publicly rejected by their rumored top targets, including a who's who of athletic directors and NBA business exec Amy Brooks, Oregon President Michael Schill and the committee made their way down the list to who else but old George. Coveted for his media experience with MLB, NBC, and Hearst, Schill dubbed him the new prototype for a sports commissioner. Waving away retractors by citing his time as a student athlete and as a sports exec with the Aces, they were adamant that his inexperience in college athletics wouldn't matter. National reporters ran with the narrative, broadly viewing the hire as a home run, but fans and local media weren't so easily convinced. Champagne Larry was a broadly similar profile, a hotshot sports business exec with no work experience in college athletics, and, given his track record, they were rightfully skeptical. Only his reputation as a collaborator and generally friendly guy separated him from the beleaguered Scott, two personality traits he would work hard to install as the central tenets of his regime. Practically from day one, Kliavkoff's peers held his feet to the fire. Any hopes and dreams of gently easing into the job were dashed in his first month when Texas and OU, once candidates to join the Pac-12, announced they were leaving the Big 12 to join the SEC. Everyone could see what this move was about. Their brands dwarfed those of their conference mates, and, given the SEC's relative strength, they could position themselves to double their media distributions on a new deal. The whole of the NCAA was caught reeling. If this could happen to the two biggest brands in another conference, what was to stop it happening to yours? Absolutely nothing. Kliavkoff first considered shoring up the league by absorbing the 8 remaining members of the Big 12. The idea was that more schools and more markets with more inventory would be a more attractive proposition to TV networks. All they had to do was get an offer on the table and get it over the line to lock in their membership for at least the next decade, at which point it would be someone else's problem anyway. Hastily, the conference drafted a subcommittee of 3 presidents and 3 ADs to consider the proposition. The general feeling was that members would be okay adding teams from more important markets, but were unwilling to make wholesale changes to accommodate, effectively, their direct competition. USC President Carol Folt, however, was incredulous that her peers would even consider such an idea. What need, after all, did the Conference of Champions have to expand? Given the Trojans' importance to a prosperous future, Kliavkoff and the committee tabled the idea. Nobody wanted to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. Still acutely aware of stagnation, however, Kliavkoff, along with the ACC's Jim Phillips and the Big Ten's Kevin Warren, decided that they could stop this threat all at once. Dubbed the Alliance, the leagues announced they'd be informally collaborating on pressing issues from realignment to NIL to stop the SEC's slow crawl to absolute power. There was just one minor issue. Though they publicly extolled on the virtues of the common good, it didn't really look like anything was happening. As far as fans were concerned, the cooperation had to have been behind the scenes. The big games they had visioned when the alliance was born, Michigan USC, Oregon Ohio State, never really materialized. NIL was still without regulations, and everyone assumed at least dominated by the big Southern teams. In fact, aside from a couple athlete wellness initiatives and voting together to strike down the 12-team playoff, there wasn't any tangible proof of collaboration at all, just a handshake and some press releases. That was tenuous, to say the least. While Kliavkoff and Phillips slept at the wheel, staking their livelihoods on assurances of good faith between friends, Warren was burning the midnight oil. The Big Ten's TV deal was up first, and rumors emerged that the value of the new media rights contract would exceed $1 billion a year. There was a glaring discrepancy between the three conferences forming. $1 billion was much more in line with what the SEC had signed for than what the Pac-12 or ACC were going to receive, and the schools were tacitly aware. Everyone knew it was just a matter of time before someone started acting in self-interest and brought this house of cards crashing down. Shockingly, that blow came from the self-interest capital of the world, Los Angeles. Unlike his peers, Southern Cal athletic director Mike Bohn wasn't content singing Kumbaya and holding hands to keep the peace. His entire career was built on ruthless opportunism. He shepherded Colorado out of the Big 12 and into the Pac-12. He oversaw huge capital projects and a first-ever G5 playoff berth at Cincinnati, setting the school up to join the Power Conference ranks after his departure. Even his work at USC had been untouchable, stealing Lincoln Riley from underneath Oklahoma's nose and returning the program to national prominence, garnering himself national plaudits in the process. It's nearly inconceivable that nobody saw him operating in the shadows to get a slice of the billion-dollar pie, but somehow his clandestine operation succeeded. Merely 8 days after the alliance announced a joint venture to celebrate 50 years of Title IX, news broke that Big Ten ADs and presidents would vote to add USC and crosstown rivals UCLA in 2024. Kliavkoff was so catastrophically unaware that he learned during his vacation in Montana. The Pac-12's key market was stolen away in the middle of the night, and they didn't even get the chance to counteroffer. There were some initial discussions about trying to replace the two traditional powers. Mountain West schools like San Diego State and Fresno State had been remarkably successful over the previous decade, but presidents were uncertain what they could offer to media partners in a new deal. To have any hope of keeping the conference together, Kliavkoff and the league decided they would have to bring their media rights to market ahead of schedule, as is, before more bleeding could occur. Except they couldn't. Fox, the league's primary media partner, had a 3-month exclusive negotiating window and no intentions to use it. They had just spent a small fortune to get in on the Big Ten deal, and in their eyes, it would be just as useful to stall and see if more brands would leave for the league they already invested in. When the window finally expired, ESPN bid around $30 million per school. Kliavkoff was happy to negotiate from there. His in-house analysis suggested it was roughly in the right range, but the presidents were aghast. One even suggested that the schools counter with over $50 million, a figure seemingly conjured from hope rather than reality, and Kliavkoff let them walk all over him, despite knowing how poorly it would end. ESPN's execs laughed in his face at the suggestion of such a fee, and the two sides broke to regroup. Meanwhile, the Big 12, who added 4 strong G5 brands to stay afloat, jumped the line and secured their future, accepting ESPN's $30 million. Overjoyed at such guaranteed stability that would have been unthinkable a year before. Insightfully, Commissioner Brett Yormark also snuck in a provision that for any P5 school who joined the conference, the TV deal would increase to allow them a full share. Kliavkoff was caught with his pants down. His ADs now had no financial incentive to circle back for ESPN's offer. If he couldn't wrangle a better one somewhere, the schools could freely walk to the Big 12 for the same money on the same network. He continued working all angles, testing the waters with NBC, CBS, ESPN, Fox, a combination of any of those, but he needed one big bet to get back in control. One throw of the dice with which he'd either sink or swim. He needed to bring LA back. USC was beyond his grasp. A private school whose president didn't much respect him and whose AD didn't much respect anyone, they were off the board. But UCLA was vulnerable. Their change in conference affiliation, though agreed in principle, still had to be ratified by the University of California Board of Regents, whose flagship, Cal, stood to sustain significant harm from the move. The plan, therefore, was simple. Turn the Regents by finding a gross number that came out to the same net value when factoring in UCLA's increased logistical costs. After some back and forth, he got enough support to win the vote at $52 million a year if the league paid UCLA's fee to renege on the Big Ten. All he had to do was convince 10 presidents and ADs, motivated almost solely by self-interest, to play along. Naive doesn't even begin to describe it. Oregon so quickly shut the effort down that you'd be forgiven for not knowing it happened at all. Why should the Ducks, one of the biggest brands in college athletics in their own right, subsidize UCLA? Why should any school sign a grant of rights for a hypothetical payout that could end up being worse than the Big 12's Plan B just to keep a team like the Bruins around? They hadn't won the league in football since 1998. They finished 2022 outside the top 50 in attendance despite playing in a 96,000-seat stadium, and their blue blood basketball team was going on 28 years without a title. It all made no sense. Out of cards to play, the remaining members gave Kliavkoff an ultimatum. Bring us a suitable deal by the end of July or it's over. At that point, it may have already been over. It was no great secret that several schools, including Big 12 founding member Colorado and border war foes Oregon and Washington, already had one foot out the door. A decade of cascading disasters at the league office had eroded all confidence in their ability to accomplish anything, and Kliavkoff certainly hadn't done much to change that. He shopped their rights around, leveraging his TV contacts to put together a huge mishmash linear deal and his tech contacts to put together an ambitious streaming package with Apple, but days before he was set to present them, the bottom fell out. On July 26th, Colorado, whose membership had been precarious since hiring new football coach Deion Sanders, announced they weren't waiting around any longer. The Big 12 had come to them with ironclad assurances and, crucially, a path back into Texas recruiting that they couldn't turn down. Kliavkoff's patchwork TV deal collapsed. The lack of stability was far too risky for an industry which had seen years of downturn in the wake of the streaming era he had helped architect. Left only with a contract from Apple on the table, Kliavkoff summoned everything he had to sell it to his schools. Yes, it was only $23 million guaranteed, but if subscriptions sold well, incentives could catapult the deal above even the Big 12. Some viewed the prospect of being first movers with great enthusiasm. It was reported that Phil Knight, one of the most powerful men in sports, was aggressively lobbying Oregon to sign the deal. For a while, it even looked like it might get over the line. A meeting of the presidents was on the books, and all indications were that it was to ratify the contract. Except behind the scenes, Kliavkoff had been outmaneuvered again. Washington's president, who was outwardly advocating for schools to sign the deal, had serious reservations about removing their games from TV and discreetly reignited talks with the Big Ten. The Big Ten then discreetly reignited talks with Oregon, a rival and natural travel partner for the Huskies. Aware that those two could back out and implode the whole thing on a whim, the remaining four corner schools, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah, entered negotiations with the Big 12, readying their own exits. When everyone went to sleep on August 3rd, the league was going to survive. But by the end of August 4th, every school with a parachute had pulled their cord. On Kliavkoff's brief watch, the troubled but once great Pac-12 had been reduced to 10, then 9, then 4, and still it continued to bleed. Stanford and Cal, the two biggest brands of the four committed to going down with the ship, saw that the Pac-12 had no recognizable future academically or athletically and began looking for their own way out. The first call obviously was to the Big Ten. On top of having prestigious institutions like Michigan, Illinois, and Northwestern, it was by far the most stable and lucrative of any league that might take them. They weren't as high on the idea as the schools might have hoped, so the second call was made to the ACC. While not as lucrative as the other power leagues, the ACC, with schools like UNC, Duke, and Notre Dame, offered serious academic prestige and strong brands in Olympic sports where the two Bay Area powers really buttered their bread. Against strong opposition from UNC, Clemson, and Florida State, the ACC narrowly elected the two schools to the league, leaving behind little more than a carcass out west. In one final fatal error, Kliavkoff convened a board meeting of all 12 schools to see if anyone had a single clue what was supposed to happen next. Washington State and Oregon State took the opportunity to file suit against the league and Kliavkoff, arguing that they, as the only continuing members, should exercise sole control over the conference and its assets. It was clear he was losing his job. It was only a matter of who was going to be the one to make the call. Helpless, he watched as the world burned down around him. The two remaining members in the end won the fight and terminated his contract on February 29, 2024. He inherited the league in a bad spot, sure, but somehow he had made it worse. Every step of the Kliavkoff era in the Pac-12 was hallmarked by short-sightedness, naivety, and flat-out ineptitude. And whether it was through incompetence or malice, the presidents and ADs did very little to stand in the way of a man in much too deep. In truth, that sums up his career. He was a true pioneer of streaming, well respected in the industry and employed by two of the world's largest media companies. But he couldn't leave well enough alone. Like his parents had in coming to this country, he had to chase his dreams. Unfortunately, his dreams seemed totally foreign. There is some merit in his failure, at least. Without failure, how do we learn? But the merit in failure is in failing yourself, not in failing Jackie from Portland or Bill from Spokane, not in failing a long storied line of forebears, and certainly not in failing so drastically that your name lives on in infamy.